Alright, welcome back to what I can't believe is another one of these. Here is a timetable with what this video is going to be about, so please feel free to skip ahead. There should also be chapter markers in the description, and as a result, those chapter markers should also appear on your timeline. So skip ahead, skip to the parts that sound interesting to you. I expect that this video is going to be pretty long again, so I don't necessarily recommend watching it front to back, pick and choose what you want to see. Now for everybody else who's still here, hi, welcome. This is going to be another building tips, tricks, techniques video, much like my previous three, so thank you for tuning in. A couple of things that are going to be different today. I didn't bring B-roll this time, I didn't bother. Instead, I'm going to be walking through this little cityscape, which the eagle-eyed among you might recognize. And I want to put it out there right now before anybody goes into the comment section to ask, how'd you get that? I've seen that featured before. I didn't have your name on it. Yeah, mea culpa. I have multiple usernames that I use on the internet. I made this map. And I'm very grateful to have seen it featured. So, I just want to put that out there before there's any confusion as to why I have it and where you can get it. I'm afraid you can't get it. I have it because it's mine. Beyond that, what's going to be different in this video? There's going to be a recap section. I'm hoping to put the recap in the middle of the video, but if things drag on too much, we might end up finding the recap more like at the end of the first third, at which point I'll realize that I failed at being concise, as I'm doing right now. But I want to recap some of the building techniques from the previous three videos, because the first one is 2 hours and something long, and the second and the third one, those aren't short videos either by any stretch of imagination. So with the game as of today, I hope, if I manage to make my upload date, with the game being officially out as of today, I want to give those techniques a second chance at being discovered. So I'm putting them in here. Of course, that means if you've seen my previous three videos, as soon as you get to the recap section, start skipping because it's not going to be anything new. Now, the other thing that's going to be new with this video is going to be a little section right after this prologue, which is going to be about some general building tips, actually more like control tips for some of the things that you can use the tools for that might not be immediately obvious because they might not be entirely intended. However, I'm putting those in their own little section because they're kind of important, more important than some of the esoteric techniques that we see in my videos. So I wanted to put all of those in one place where you can easily find them. So it's going to be this prologue is going to end, then we'll do general tips, then we'll do a quick recap of what I consider to be the most important techniques from previous videos, and then we'll go into the wild mix of strange building techniques that I and other people in the community have come up with. Now, when I present a technique that is not of my own making, I'll flash the name of the person that I stole it from in the corner. If you end up finding yourself as a viewer featured in one such text box in a corner and you don't want to be there, do let me know and I'll blur you out again. But with how many techniques we've acquired at this point, I didn't want to harass everybody in their DMs for explicit permission to feature one of their user handles here. So that's how I'm gonna be doing it. Beyond that, a couple of other notes. Some of the techniques that I'm going to feature are still from the demo era. So a couple of things that we discovered before the first demo cycle ended that I didn't manage to get into a video anymore back then, I'm still going to feature now. However, they might be out of date. There's definitely a couple of techniques which are what I would call dead on arrival, which is to say that the things that these techniques emulate have since been added to the game, which, I mean, is fortunate for us, unfortunate for my career as a man who peddles in building techniques, I suppose. But yeah, you know, where we're coming up on my right, on a bench, is a bench. There's a bench that I've built using the fence tool. But if you remember the back of the church that we walked past, there has since been benches added to the ground clutter in this game. So you don't technically need to do that anymore. I'll still show you how I did it. I mean, it should be fairly obvious, but you know, I'll still point it out. But that's what I mean when I say that a technique is dead on arrival. You don't technically need to build benches like that anymore because we have benches now. And it's great and they look much better. However, you might still find specific circumstances, some of which I will point out, where that might still be useful to you, so I didn't want to forego presenting it all together. Okay, I think that may be all of it. It's a big thing though. I didn't write myself a script for this intro section, but yeah, let me... You know what, let's begin the tips and tricks section right here. So I've been using the first person walking mode in the photo mode menu, and I've hidden my UI with H. That's how that's how I've been taking this footage. And a tip, because you might find the walking speed to be rather too slow. First of all, the walking speed is partially determined by your movement speed in the camera settings, I'm fairly certain. So if I up that, yep, that already has us walking much faster. Alternatively, if you find that the walking speed is too fast, you can turn it down back there and you'll slow down. But also, you can use E and Q to hover up and down. In the walking mode, you need to hold control to turn on no clip to make use of that. You know, no clip. But if you're not no clipping, if you're just walking and then you start pressing E and Q, it actually makes you speed up, I'm going to guess, because much like strafing back in the day, back in old first-person shooters, it just adds the speed that you would go up if you could float onto your movement speed. So this is normal, and then this is while holding E. This is normal. This is while holding Q. So, you know, be aware of that. You can speed this whole camera thing up a little bit. And yeah, no clip is how I've been getting through doors. Which, by the way, you don't need for these doors. You don't need no clip to get through the path doors, but you do need it to get through the window doors. Anyway, that's my city. That's what I wanted to show you, and this is the limit with how far I can walk. So, without any further ado, let's get into the rest of the tips, for which I will take us to a different glade. See you there. Okay, welcome to the rest of the general tips. Now, the thing that I want to start out with is a clarification on a point of freehand walls. This was a segment in my very first video, and back then I was presenting a workaround for a bug that is no longer present in the game now. So back in the day, for a while, in certain circumstances, you couldn't unsnap the wall tool from the control points that you already had put down, right? So my cursor right now is snapping to the end of the wall, and I can hit control to release it again. I couldn't do that back then. But this means that in order to get shorter wall segments, you no longer need to build it up and then erase it and then build it up and then erase it to get the segments as short as they go. You can now unsnap the cursor and just draw them as short as you need. Anyway, that's the one thing. And the other thing is, with these new controls that we have for walls nowadays, where you can right-click the right-hand wall and you get a similar menu to the one that you get when you right-click the building blocks. This also means that you can now get shorter wall segments than you are able to just draw with a brush. If I try and draw a short segment with a brush, there is... Oh man, they lowered that as well. Well, never mind. It used to be that about like this would be the shortest segment that you could draw, but... Yep, they did lower that. well, never mind. Nevertheless, the thing I actually wanted to point out is that by using these two control nodes, you can now get desperately thin brick segments, and we will be making use of that here later in the video. But I just wanted to point out that these wall controls now exist, and this is one of the things that you can do with them. The other thing that you can do with them is, in my first video I have a segment on how to draw straighter walls, and I propose, you know, angling your camera up like this, you know, holding left click to start a wall and then moving your camera, because of course, while your hand might be unsteady, if you move the camera, that's only going to move in one direction and you get a very straight piece of wall. But now that we have these wall controls, if you just create a short segment of wall that has two control nodes, you can grab this right node and pull it wherever you want, and it's always going to be in a straight line from where the other one is. You know, and consequently, if you draw another node on here, you can pull this one out and it's always going to create perfectly straight segments. So that's just a couple of general notes on the new wall controls. They are very handy and they make some of the things from my first video a lot easier than they used to be. That's number one. Number two, let's actually get ourselves a house in here because I want to talk about bushes. Let me get a staircase in here because that's usually where I encounter it. Yeah, that's pretty good. Alright, so we have this situation, right? I've made myself a staircase. I'll put a door on top of it for flavor. And I now still have some of these bushes clipping through. And it doesn't look great. You can exert control over these bushes in a variety of ways. The most basic that I enjoy doing is just raising the house block up a little bit because it will stop generating the bushes. However, that might not always be an option for you because, you know, now you have to put another block underneath that and make it minimum height and draw a staircase around it to give it foundations. It's a whole process. You can see some of this layering technique in my video segment on arcading, which I think is in the second video in the series. Don't quote me on that. Might be the third one. Anyway, you might not always want to do that. So of course you can draw path around here to make it disappear, but now you've like lost your grass, right? The third option is you can actually use the flower tool, and where the flower tool used to give us mighty bushes immediately, it's like set to half strength now. So on first pass it just gives you flowers, and then on second pass it gives you bushes. What this means is that you can actually use the flower tool to make bushes like this disappear. Because, you know, you apply the flower brush and the game is like, all right, remove everything, put our flowers there. But the flowers itself that it spawns when you just like click the ground once like this are themselves non-existent because the strength of the brush has been turned down from what it used to be. So if you have bushes somewhere sometimes that you want to get rid of, but neither lifting the building out of the way or drawing with path is really an option for you, try just like teasing it with a flower brush, because that might just work for you. Though it will also get rid of grass, which looks kind of funky. And of course, you'll have to get it first try because, you know, if I try to apply the flower brush again here, it'll spawn bushes. But if I just tease it, tease it. Tease it. There you go. It can work out, and it can also not work out, but you get the idea. Just add this to your arsenal. You can use the flower brush to get rid of flowers, ironically enough. Alright, that should have been jump cut because I messed up a little bit. But I have point on trees. That should be point number 3, number 4, whatever. We now have this tree tool with which we can create new trees. And I know a few people, or I have seen a few people who like, upon generating their new glade, taking the tree eraser, cranking this thing up to max size, and then cleaning out everything so that they have an empty field to work with, which is perfectly understandable. However, I want to give you one word of warning, just so that you're aware of it. This tree tool that you get to then replenish your trees once you're done building does not spawn all of the tree varieties, as of the time of recording anyway, that you can get when you generate your glade. So as you can see, as I start to place these trees around, all of them are rather simple, clean, kind of fairly straight-ish stem with, you know, bushy top. Sort of this shape of trees. However, if you peek over here into the original tree line a little bit, there's a shorter specimen in here, and these are a couple of the examples that you will not be able to produce with the tree tool. So if these trees are at all of interest to you, I suggest taking the tree tool, moving them somewhere safe before you start building. And, you know, then when you have them all in tree storage, I suppose, you know, then you can do whatever you want over here. Go wild with your path brush, go wild with your eraser, make all the rest disappear, and then later you can bring these trees back in. And as far as I can tell, every glade has a couple of tree varieties that the glade spawns for you when you start the game, but that you just can't get the tree tool to produce. This might be fixed in the future, it might not be. I don't know how much of it is really a bug, but, you know, stay aware of it. If you have a specific tree that you can see here in the tree line that you really enjoy, that you really like the look of, and it gives you an idea for something that you might want to do in your glade, you know, grab him and take him somewhere safe before you go wild on the map, because you might inadvertently delete him. But yeah, that is that point, and that makes only one more general tip before we can move into the recap segment, namely a note on Gothic windows, because we now have Gothic windows, and quite in contrast to the cottage windows, that's how I've seen them referred to, the Gothic windows in their coloring options have this blank option which matches the color of a window to the color of the underlying masonry. So if we have the light bricks, it matches the light bricks. If we have the darker bricks, the darker, and so on. It matches the colors of the masonry. As such, it also matches the natural color variation that you get in the masonry, which can look quite funky. And, you know, sometimes it's a little jarring for me, especially if I have a whitewashed building and then I have this kind of stained green window on it. Now, of course, step one would be to paint the window white as well, which is already going to help. But there's this ring around it, right, which stays green. Here's the tip. Much like you can click the cottage windows to re-roll what decoration is placed on them, you can also click the Gothic windows to re-roll their color variation. So if you end up with a Gothic window where you're like, that color is off for this wall, they don't generate decorations. So you might think that clicking them is useless, but it's not, because it actually re-rolls their color. So take note of that. That was huge for me when I discovered it, because you might remember from a few minutes ago that cathedral building I had in the city. And, you know, a nice blazingly white cathedral with stained green windows really wasn't the look that I was going for. So I was very happy when I discovered that I could just keep doing this until I get a color that pleases me. Alright, that should have been another jump cut because I messed up again. I want to give you a couple more notes on clutter. That's going to be the last for this tips and tricks section. And we already know clutter, however, we now have more variety in clutter. And I have found myself in situations where I wanted clutter and I couldn't get it to appear, so I would like to point out a couple of things that seem to affect it. Now, we know clutter appears tied to windows and tied to doors. So if I erase this bit of path, the clutter that the door generated over here disappears. If I click the windows, they generate new clutter. That's what we already know. Now, sometimes clutter can change depending on drawing path underneath it. So for some reason, this card moves slightly when I draw a path here. And I believe this box disappears entirely, right? If you use the flower brush, you can get the clutter to disappear completely. And the other thing is, and this is the thing that really did my head in, clutter appears on flat rooftops, right? So I get this block and I make it flat so that it has a roof, and you can see, let me actually get this path out of here because that door no longer works. But you can see that the cart and the chair, they once again spawn the way that they did before. Except that the different door now makes the chair re-roll into a different object. Don't worry too much about that. Now the point that I wanted to make is that clutter generates fine in the middle of a roof like this. However, in my city, what I originally did was I laid out my streets kind of like this. I would grab a piece, I would make it long and flat, and then I would lay it across like so to make a road, and then I would build the buildings either side of it, right? However, as a result, every building that I built had a rooftop with an edge right at the edge of the building. And the result of that is that I can click this window as much as I please, but clutter is not going to appear here because it's too close to the edge of the rooftop. I have to extend this block into the building to make the clutter appear. So take my advice if you're going to do a building, if you're going to do a city. If you're going to do a city or a building with paved road in front of it, if at all possible, and if you want clutter, make sure that the block that gives you the paved road extends into the building a little bit. Because if the edge is too close to where the clutter wants to appear, it won't. Alternatively, if you don't want any clutter, make sure that you do your paved road like this, because it's gonna force the clutter to not spawn. You know, take that as you will. But those are just some general notes on how to control clutter. You can control it with you can somewhat control it with the path tool. I'll leave it at somewhat. You can definitely control it with the flower tool. And it will not spawn on the edge of a rooftop. So depending on whether you want it or not, you might have to make sure that your quote-unquote roads extend a certain ways into the buildings. Otherwise, you're cheating yourself out of clutter. Also, look, now we have a little bush sticking through our road. Let's go back to the tip with a flower brush and get that gone. A great callback to, yeah, the first thing that we presented here. Alright, this is the part of the video where I very unceremoniously admit that even after multiple corrections and retakes, I realized that I still have more tips. Actually, I realized that I still have more tips in the making of the rest of this video. So let us actually spend a little more time here still. And I have 5 more things on my list. So, first one. On the topic of fences, if you draw a fence and you draw path underneath it to get fence arches, something that you might encounter quite opposed to stone arches. Stone arches you can still recolor. Fence arches you can't. Something about the way that the hitboxes on the arches are constructed means that there's nowhere for us to click. So if you end up in a situation where you have fence arches and you want to repaint them and you can't repaint them, just erase a bit of path to turn part of it back into a normal fence and then it should let you. That's one thing. That's something that I've encountered quite a lot. Something else about fences. In the rest of the video, at some point, I'm going to start talking about putting detailing on half-timbered buildings using fences and building benches using fences, right? You know, we saw the bench in the intro. One thing that I recommend for that, especially if you have a big build like I have in my city, you know, you might have a building, say, over here that is in the middle of a road. There's another building blocking the view of it right here. There's a street in between. You know, if you start fiddling around in here, it's you know, gotta be a recipe for nightmares. And, you know, moving everything up or moving everything out of the way might also not be the coolest thing to do. Something that I recommend doing if you have the space for it in your build is making yourself a little work area. That's what I did. I had a little patch of land set aside in one of the corners, actually the corner of the build where the like big villas with the gardens are now, where I had a patch of grass, sorry, a patch of path, not grass, and I had a building there. And that building was perfectly matched to the buildings that I was working on. So I'd take this building block, I would attach it to another building like this, so it has the perfect orientation, right? This has the exact same orientation as this. And then I would take this block, I would take it over to my work area, and I would put it in here, and then I would use this as a guide. So if I was doing, you know, let's say window cladding underneath this window that's in roughly this location, then I would set up all of my pieces over here where I have all of this freedom of movement. I would set up my pieces here, get them just right, just the way that I need it to be. Or something like that. And then I would take them back over here. And because those buildings are identical to one another, you know, something that I set up over there is also going to fit perfectly here. You know, that's a general idea for workflow. You know, if you're gonna do a city build like I did and you're gonna start messing around with detail work like that within the streets, if you can at all avoid it, you know, don't do the detailing after you did all of the city block building. But for me, myself, I need to have the full city block put down before I can start detailing, because otherwise I just don't have any idea of what I'm doing. So, you know, if you find yourself in a situation like this, make yourself a work area. Prepare your detailing pieces over here and only then bring them over here. Now that we have this functionality where you can right-click blocks and then move them, make use of that. That is one huge tip that I have. That's actually what I did for that bench. Here, this bench. You know, this bench that I have in here, I didn't build it there. I built it before these buildings existed, somewhere over here. I took a block and I matched it to that building. I took it over here and I built the bench, and then I took the pieces making up the bench and I slid those in here, and it was so much easier, so much faster. I can't recommend it enough if you're going to do this sort of detailing work in this sort of a city block or any comparable situation. Make yourself a work area. That's a tip that I have on workflow. Beyond that, something on a point of windows, but also more general controls. You might find yourself, if you do highly layered, highly detailed buildings, you might eventually find yourself in a situation where you're trying to select something and the game just won't quite play along. So I'm trying to select that arrow hole in there that you're gonna see more of later, but right now it's the best example that I have of it. I'm trying to select this arrow hole, but all of the blocks that I have in here are taking priority over my mouse. And if you find yourself in a situation like this with windows, with lanterns, with, you know, pretty much any object, even freehand wall and fences sometimes if I'm like trying to get a corner, select the corresponding tool. Even if you just want to move this window, if you don't want to add another one to it, By selecting the window tool first, it tells the game, alright, he's not trying to readjust any of these blocks here, he's trying to do something with a window. And that will make my cursor actually snap to this window, where previously it kept trying to interact with the floor and the wall pieces. So that's another tip. If you find yourself in a situation where you've layered things too tightly and you can no longer touch the thing that you want to touch, select the tool for that object, even if you're not trying to add to it, but that will make your cursor select the correct thing. All right. 2 more things. One on Windows actually, so let me just look at one thing real quick and then I bring us over. Then I will bring us back over into the tips world. These 3 windows here, you might recognize that these windows don't usually go like this. Well, it's not technically an illegal placement, but you might struggle to place it like this. So, in previous videos I had demonstrated how you can move windows more tightly together than you used to be able to, or than you are supposed to be able to. Let's take, 2 of these, by like pulling on them repeatedly like this, and I do believe that it still works to a degree. However, one note that I'm not entirely sure if it always used to be like this, but it's certainly like this now, so I would like to point it out, is that if you have, let's say, 3 singles like this, you can hold control to not make them snap into the next largest window. So while you usually couldn't place these adjacent to one another without them combining, if you hold control, that is actually no longer the case. You can place these about as tightly as they go, which opens up more options for, you know, fancy window placements. I'm sure that you can come up with something more creative than I took the smallest window and I put 3 of them. But something to be aware of, the hold control to unsnap also works on Windows. Now, I'm not sure if it always did. And then, one last thing, which will actually require some water. You might... No, it's coming in the recap. Alright. So you might at some points in your TinyGlade career find yourself tempted to use terrain in order to get a building looking right. We're going to use this for flying buttresses in a little bit. One thing that I want to note about the way that the terrain tool and the way that the water tool interact with one another is that you can use the water tool to create sharper drop-offs on the terrain tool. So with the terrain, you know, this is the widest that it goes, this is the slimmest that it goes. So if you have a block that you're using for something structural inside your building, let's say, but the block is ever so much too wide, like you only need it this wide, but it's too big and it's spilling out of your building on all sides. As long as you have, like I do in my city, a like road level like this where you're using a flat roof to cover up the ground, you can use the water tool in order to cut this back, and then you do it a little more gingerly than I just did. Bring in the road to cover it back up and nobody will know. And from my experience, ducks will not try to land in this water that you've covered with the rooftop either. So if you need to use terrain for, let's say, flying buttresses, but the smallest terrain that you can get actually spills out of your building, if you're using roads like I do, you can use water to cut back the terrain and you'll end up with a very small rock with very sharp corners. This is actually sort of spoiling something that comes later in the video, but don't worry about it. Alright. And this really is my last tip. You need to do some fine adjustment on your terrain. You can use water if it doesn't break your build. There is always one more. There is always one more. One last note. Our third last node, third or fourth. Half-timbered buildings. So when you place down a half-timbered building and it gives you this box structure, I suppose, on the wall. If you then start placing your windows, you might be tempted to just smack them in the middle, but I would actually advise against that, because the half timbering will only change from this sort of box, repeating box pattern if you interrupt it. So I actually suggest putting your windows on the beams, on the vertical beams, because that way you get this little element underneath the window and you also get more of these diagonal elements to the side. So it doesn't have to be smack dab on top of it, like adjacent to it is also sufficient, but that's how you get more intricate half timbering patterns on your walls. If you just take your windows and throw them in the middle every time, then you end up with a very clean, but perhaps very boring wall. That's the last one. Okay, recap time. I hope my audio is still alright, because at some point between the last recording and this recording, OBS decided to toss out my audio settings for TinyGlade, so I don't know if the volume is still the same. It sounds about the same to me, but, you know, we'll find out in final edit, I suppose. Anyway, I brought us back to my city because a lot of the things that I wanted to recap I've actually used in this town, and that's part of how I came to the conclusion that these things are really so important that I need to show them to you guys again. So we're going to be looking at a few of the buildings around here. And first and foremost, it's this Merlon trim that I put on everything that I do. I'm gonna recap that simply because it became my favorite thing to do. And I honestly have to stop myself from putting it on every building that I make. But for one, it's that we'll be recapping. Second thing is these support columns that the game puts on unsupported roof pieces. We'll be talking about those, using those for accents on corners like I did here, or for accents on walls like here. Beyond that, we'll of course be talking about buttresses again. Those I featured, I think, actually in my second video. Flying buttresses, but I'll excuse me, flying buttresses, but I'll also talk about normal buttresses, which I use, you know, pretty sparingly, I suppose, around exterior walls. There's also a few back here holding up the tower. But so we'll be talking about buttresses. We'll be talking about arcading, or arcades in general, so, you know, stacked arches, which I use for, again, accenting depth on flat walls. I also use them all the way over here on the, I suppose, the main hall building. So we'll be talking about that. And beyond that, let me think for a second, let me look at my list. Of course! But we're talking a little bit about using arches as supports, which I use for bridges around this place, primarily in this town. And I want to talk about stairs, specifically stairs the hard way. There's also stairs the medium way, which I both present in my first video, but I just want to point this out again, how I got a staircase up all the way over there. And for anybody who hasn't seen the first video, it is tedious work, it is all bricks, but the results can be quite nice and it's very versatile. So those are the things that I wanted to recap. I'll take us over into an empty glade and then we can go from there. Alright, here is a mostly fresh glade, so let's get recapping. Now I'm gonna start with arcading, and again, arcading is the little rows upon rows of arches that I like to put on the sides of my buildings. some of them anyway. So for arches, we're going to need path underneath our building. And then the question becomes, well, if I have path underneath all of my building, how am I going to get wall into my building? So let's adjust this inside block until it has about the correct proportions. And then we have to bring this up off the ground high enough for it to clear the interaction zone, I'm gonna call it, of the path tool. So that should be about high enough. Let's also get this tall enough for a second floor once we get there. And now, in order to make the building not appear floating, I'm gonna get another block, make it flat, make it short, bring it all the way to the bottom, and it'll generate us stairs, but that's alright. At least for me, visually, that's alright. I don't really mind this. Though I do like to bring the sides in until they're mostly flush. But you could, of course, also bring this out and have a porch. Here we go. Now for the second row, we do the same as the first row. Just grab a block, put it on the ground so that it generates arches. And now, in order to interact with that, I'll have to take this block and I'll have to take that block, move them back a bit. That should clear up this tooltip for me to interact with it. Bring it up, yeah, about this high. Bring this back forward and bring that back forward. And that's how you get a building with rows of arches on it. Now that's the first way of doing arcading, and as you can see, because we're using the full blocks like this, the arcades still have the merlons on top of them, you know, the little defensive elements. If you don't want that, you can do this with freehand wall. So, excuse me, that's the one I wanted. So if we move these out of here and we get the eraser, you know, you can erase part of the wall and then you could put it back together. However, there's currently a bit of a bug in that if you have arches and a seam, the seam no longer interacts with the arches, but the bricks right around it drop faster than everywhere else. So we will not be putting those together with the wall tool. I'll just overlap them like this for the time being, but I'm sure that will be fixed in the future. And now, when you have freehand wall and arches, if you bring this all the way down, you know, the whitewashing is actually a nice visual indicator of me pulling this down, right at the bottom of its travel, the freehand wall is going to give you a clean, mostly clean top edge. It does still get tripped up by terrain a little bit. You can see we have a bit of an undulation here, which results in us getting a bit of a drop on this corner. So in this case, you know, you could try to rectify this with terrain, which is going to get it perfectly even at the top. And then the benefit is that this way your arcades no longer have the merlons, which you might find more visually pleasing, which I myself find more visually pleasing. But yeah, those are two varieties of arcading. Now the other thing that I do and that I keep harping on about how great it is merlon trims. So I like to grab a block. Let's start from here. Grab a block, make it minimum size, make it flat at the top, and then I put it around my building at the top like this, bring it down, and then that should give my rooftop a nice little trim. And the main reason why I have the inside block in all of this flat currently, why I don't have it generate a roof on its own, is that if I tried to bring this out to match the size of a Merlon's a little bit better, I would start getting it coming through, clipping through on the sides, right? So the way that I do this, the way that I find it a little more visually pleasing, because this way I either have the roof awkwardly far behind or clipping through too much, I actually use a separate piece for the rooftop in the first place. Just match this up a little bit better. Here we go. So I grab another piece. You might be catching on to the fact that all of my buildings usually consist of more pieces than meets the eye. And then this, because it's elevated a bit, I can bring the tiles further forward than I would be able to with this block's roof. I can bring this separate one further forward without having it, you know, clip like that. So that's arcading and Merlon trims. Perfect. For the next one, I'm going to need another building, because the other thing is using columns, right? And this one also actually kind of goes along with Merlon trims. But when you have a block and you raise it up off the ground, it gives you these columns at the bottom to support it, right? And I like to use these as architectural elements. So if I bring this over here and I raise this block up until it's just slightly taller than the wall beside it, then it'll give me the columns back. And if I now wrap it around the house like this, then I get, ideally, 4 sturdy columns, 1 on each corner of the building. And if I'm feeling especially fancy, I'll actually have this one only go to the middle, and I'll grab a second one. And then that way I can also have another column right there. Now this will result in some mild clipping, but if you adjust it right, you can probably get the parts that are offensive to your eye to disappear for the most part. I think that's just about good for me. Though it is off-center. Well. Oh, how convenient. Ah, I see. Yeah. Okay. Let's leave it at that. So that's one thing that I use columns for. The other thing that I use columns for is as supports, right? And that's what I was talking about with bridges earlier. Because if I take a block and I use it as a bridge or a very large, very long balcony, whichever you find more believable in this scenario, then this looks weird, right? This can't just look weird to me. This must look weird to other people as well. Because it's so long and unsupported. And, you know, even if we make it half timbered, which makes it look a little lighter, it's still a bit strange. So, you know, I like to use those columns. Come on, put them in there. I like to use those columns to add extra support to bridges like this. Now this is using the half timber. Can also do it using a regular stone, or depending on what you like. And if you make this perfect block low enough, then you also gain these wooden supports as an extra bit of visual detail. We bring this over here, bring that over there, get another block, get it to match. Yeah, there you go, and that's looking much sturdier already. And I find that visually pleasing. And the other thing that I do to get a similar effect, but I'm going to combine them here because we're already here. I don't want to have to delete that if we're still working on it, is to use freehand wall and to use arches. And you can use this for bridges, like I said, you can use this for balconies, anything that you can think of really. So if we raise these arches up until they're just about below the block, some fine tuning may be required, then we can use those to visually add a bit of support to our building. And I actually do have to get rid of these because otherwise, here we go. Otherwise we have our arches and our columns intersecting in a way that's not quite pretty. But yeah, there you go. That's two ways of making an arch look a little more supported. A bridge. Not entirely sure what is going on with this one in the middle here, but sometimes that's just how the cookie crumbles in this game. So last thing, buttresses. Buttresses. So a buttress, a support on the side of a building, allowing you to build taller walls. You know, standard buttress procedure would be to just grab a piece of wall, put it up here, grab another piece maybe. Make this one a little lower. And you know, that's what you see on the walls in my city quite a lot. However, if you want it to be fancy, you want a flying buttress. And flying buttresses you're going to need, once again, arches for. So the way to get those clean arches that I have on the side of my church, for example, because if you just raise an arch like this, if you just raise an arch like this, you know, it's gonna have bricks on it. However, there's two ways of getting it to look cleaner. One way is to have the wall extend a little further than the path. So in this case, because the game starts its bricks down here, right? They don't quite crest the arch until it's about in the middle here, and you know, everything that's inside the arch gets deleted. So you get a pretty crisp outer line. If I was to bring this together like this and then delete the path, you know, then you can see the effect in its full glory. That's one way of getting a clean arch. So if we did that on the side of that building, let's take this wall, let's bring it in here, and let's do the same thing that we did before. Here we go. Then you can see that's a believable enough flying buttress. And what I'm very particular about, what other people don't necessarily mind as much, is for me a flying buttress really needs to intersect the wall that it attaches to at the highest point of the arch, because otherwise there's no support there, right? But that's one way of doing it. The other way is using terrain. So if you have a piece of terrain, that was not straight. If you have a piece of terrain and you draw a wall down it and then add the path underneath, same thing for the game here, where it's trying to start the bricks down here and then get them up on the top. But it doesn't quite manage to, and as a result, there is a sweet spot in here. There you go. Where you get a very clean arch. Now, for this method, the sweet spot is right at the bottom, so I have to pull this as far down as it goes to get the cleanest arch. For this one, it's actually not at the very bottom. If it's all the way to the bottom, then we get the clean top again that we were talking about with arcading over here. Here you need to go slightly up. There you go. Shout out to these vines. But yeah, it's like somewhere halfway, I think. somewhere around halfway. And that's how you get a clean arch that away. And you know, then you have to put the building over top, and that's roughly what it's gonna look like depending on how you fine-tune it. But if I take us back to my city, then as you will be able to see in here, that's not what I meant to delete, as you will be able to see in here, that's how I did it. That's how I did it. All of these arches are standing on a piece of hill that's just small enough, as small as I could get it really, in order for the building to fit over top of it. And that's kind of the main problem with flying buttresses, because you need to use at the very least path and maybe path and terrain. It doesn't really work for buildings like this that are just kind of standing singularly in the landscape. You really need a second piece of building, like on the side, that can cover up the fact that you have a door in the side of your building. So, you know, with flying buttresses, that is something that you have to be aware of as you design your building. You will need something to cover up what is going on in here. Now, I've seen some people just sort of put the arches, and I think I referenced that a couple of minutes ago, but still, well, you know, just put arches on the side like this, which actually does kind of achieve a similar look, but that's not a flying buttress. You know, this is a flying buttress. So, do be aware of that when you do flying buttresses. Let me look at my list. Merlon trims we've done, arcading we've done, buttresses we've done, stairs the hard way, right? Columns and arches we've also done. Okay, let's take one more look at stairs the hard way, and then I'll be done with recapping, but that's the last one, I promise. And let me actually demonstrate this in situ, because to do an entire staircase like this would take far too much time. So, like I had alluded to, all these are single brick stacks. So let's get this all out of here, and let's start from scratch. Now, generally I place these adjoining to a wall so that I can use that as a guide, but of course you can also just put down a wall yourself and use that as a guide. But what I do to do stairs the hard way is I place myself as perpendicular as I can be to a wall. I hold Control to disable snapping. I left click and hold, and I draw down. And I draw down. And I draw down, and I do that for 5, 10 rows, you know, depending on how tall I'm gonna go. And then once I have these rows ready, color them in appropriately first, though I often catch myself doing that far too late and I have to revert a bit. But color them in. And then you take the backmost one, you bring it up, and you should usually always have one brick in the stack that shows you the sort of max height of what you're holding. So if I cut this, the cut pieces arrive at just about the same height as the top bricks in this one do. So I'll bring this down slightly, then I cut it on the left, I cut it on the right, and then I have 3 stacks that are about the same size or the same height. And then I grab the next one and I bring it up. I cut it on the left, I cut it on the right, I cut it slightly further to the left, slightly, there you go. And that's how you make these stairs. And it is very much a tedious process, but it has actually gotten a lot better now that you can right-click walls to interact with them. It's gotten pretty convenient. But yeah, these are also too tight, so I need to space these a little bit better. And you know, those are the fine adjustments that you can make as you go along. But this method of drawing a piece of straight wall where you want your step to be, and then cutting it into 3 pieces, because this is about the size where you always get a very clean top. If we take a piece of wall, you know, you sometimes have gaps in the top row, as we have discussed, but below a certain width, you always get a perfectly flat top. And when you have it this wide, so that you get 2 large bricks, I find that to be the most aesthetically pleasing. If you go a little wider, you'll get, you know, 3 sort of smaller bricks or some variation thereof. And you can also see that this stack undulates a little bit, you know, it shifts a little bit to the right and then back to the left as it goes up. So you might end up with more seams between the blocks in here. So this is about the size that I try to make them. And that's all you do. That's the entire secret sauce. You bring this up, you cut, and you cut, and you work your way down until you're at the bottom. And that's stairs the hard way. And you know, there's stairs the medium way. For the medium way, you just, whoops, let me make that slightly smaller for us. For stacks, I've got to slow this down a little bit, I'm misspeaking too much. For stairs the medium way, you just stack minimum size blocks like this. But I find stairs the hard way to be a little more versatile, a little more controllable, and also they allow you to put in, you know, subtle curves like this. This is not my prettiest staircase, and it has gotten uglier over time as I've messed with the terrain around here. But essentially, as I was building the staircase, I realized that I couldn't get it quite low enough before I ran out of space on this platform. So I gave it a slight curve to the left so that this still lines up, you know, mostly fine. And that's not something that you could do with stairs the medium way, because stairs the medium way, you know, because this is your smallest unit, and you know, it doesn't curve too good. You can place these in a curve, but it's gonna be slightly larger, I think. Somebody prove me wrong. Somebody who really understands how to do stairs the medium way. Make me a stairs that curves very subtly like this. Anyway, that's stairs the hard way. And that is all that I wanted to recap, because as you can see when you look around in this city, these are the techniques that I've really used quite a lot. I've used stairs the hard way here, over there. I've used it over here. Arcading I've used on this building, on that building, on this building, on that building, on this building. You know, Merlon trims we have here, here, everything here. You know, a couple of buildings on the castle. Buttresses, flying buttresses, obviously, on the church. Normal buttresses on the castle. You know, these are techniques that really sort of make up what is my style at this point, or what I consider to be my style. Some people have said that they have been able to recognize the buildings that I've made because, yeah, everything will have Merlons on it. But anyway, that's the reason why I wanted to recap this. This is what I consider to be my bread and butter, and I would like for it to become your bread and butter, and then one day everybody will just build like me. Okay, but I think I've bored us with the nitty-gritty for quite long enough. Let's get into the ideas that I actually knew. A lot of them aren't from me, but let's see about some of the new esoteric techniques that you can use in the game, in the full version today. Let's go. Okay, so let us get into the long list of new ideas, new techniques. And I feel like with previous videos I've buried the lead a little bit, so let us start off with something a little more interesting, something a little more esoteric. This is a drawbridge, or the suggestion of a drawbridge anyway. My eyes register it as a drawbridge, so I'm happy with that. Now, with these techniques, I'm not going to do them from scratch like I did with a recap. I'm going to trust that if I show you how it's done, what it's made up of, that you'll be able to figure it out for yourself from there. However, I do need to pad for time a little bit, just so that the chapters don't end up being too small on the timeline. So I'll try to hit the sweet spot for length for each one of these. So this is obviously just a fence, but what I want for my drawbridges is for this unsupported wooden member to be as long as I can get it. And I don't want to see the vertical parts of the fence on either side, so that my eyes can really register this as a piece of wood hinged on this side, resting on this side, that gets pulled up by non-existent chains through these arrow holes. That, for me, is what creates the sort of drawbridge illusion. So, therefore, if we go in here, this is just a block, that's just a block, and that top one is also just a block, and you can see this is just a fence. Now, these are minimum height, primarily because the higher you have them, the longer these diagonal elements become. So by having them as low as they can get, you can sort of minimize the size of that. Alright, it's not actually as low as it can get, but it's almost as low as it can get. And on the other side, things get a little weirder still, because on the other side we can see that each one of these has a bit of a bend at the end. And the reason for that is quite simple. If we grab a piece of fence and we draw a bit of path underneath it, then there is a certain length at which you will get this cut in the middle, where the second beam starts. And like I said, I want this first beam to be as long as it can get. So, for some reason, don't ask me why, by putting a little bit of a bend at the end, it actually extends that first beam just a little bit longer than you could get if you had it completely straight. So that's the reason why all of these have a bend in the end. That is how I can get the longest size beam, and that's actually the reason why the drawbridge that I have in front of my castle in my city, why that one is a little bit shorter, because I built that one first and I hadn't discovered this at that point yet. So that is how I do my drawbridges. Here at the end I've just put one fence across to give it a bit more structural cohesion, I suppose, but you know, that's all there is to it. It's just a bunch of fences stacked next to one another. So with that said and done, let's move on to something else to do with fences. And for that I actually do want to go back to my city, so we do have an opportunity to look at my drawbridge over here, which as you can see is a little bit shorter because it is completely straight. That is the maximum length that I could get out of the fences going straight. But if I had put a little bit of a bend in them, I could have probably extended it to about here, which would honestly, I think, make a big difference. But so far, I haven't been motivated enough to redo this because it is finicky. Now, other things to do with fences. Stable doors, stable subdivisions. I did a very shoddy rendition of this with stone walls in one of my previous videos, where I acknowledged that we used to do this with fences, but we can't right now. Well, fences are back, so here it is. And I've improved it slightly. So I colored this one in so that you can see the different pieces a little bit better. But as you might imagine, all that it is, it's fences cut into small segments, so that they create, you know, a solid wall stacked next to one another. And then I just took one larger segment, put it across like this for the door, Or for the short segments on the side, I put it across like this. So that's what you're looking at here. That's the big segment across. Those are the small segments in the middle. That's the big segment across. That's the small segment in the middle. That's all there is to that. And I honestly really like how it looks. Now I do have one more fence gate suggestion and one more fence suggestion, but for that we once again need to switch maps. Okay, this map is a bit of a mess, but let's work our way slowly through it, I suppose. There's also a bunch of stuff in here that's not my own, so now the flashing name cards are really gonna start being interesting. But where I want to start is down here in this corner. So this is another design for a sort of fence gate that I made up rather recently. You know, it's essentially the same principle as the other one, but this one has a bit more of a see-through look so that you can use it for an exterior fence that looks a little bit more rickety like this. You know, because there's been a conversation recently about the fence gates that were in one of the very early TikToker videos about Tinyglade, actually, that we have never seen the light of day, that we haven't seen, and that haven't seen the light of day again since then. So, you know, this is just something to emulate that sort of look. Same principle as always. Also, same principle as always is this, which I've used before, not colored white, but in general, which, you know, is supposed to sort of emulate a solid white picket fence, the way that you would expect to see it in suburbia. Again, it's just short segments of fence, but put on path so that they're pretty solid. Actually, I almost feel like if I erased the path. Well, it doesn't look better, but I could imagine that if you spaced them properly, using a lot of segments of that size might actually beat this out in terms of aesthetics. Somebody should try that. By somebody, I mean me. I should try that sometime. Alright, let's not worry too much about it. But yeah, what's all this other stuff? Let's start with furniture. Because furniture has become a thing. So this couch is the first one that I did. I honestly don't even know who came up with furniture first at this point. As a difficult one. Because during the demo days, I remember there being a prompt for a tavern, and I didn't submit a build for the tavern, but I put a couple of kind of pretend chairs on a balcony, and then a lot of people posted, like, well, a couple of people posted actual, like, interior shots of a tavern with, you know, chairs and tables and stuff, and a bar in the background. And then ever since then, a couple more people have done, a lot of people have done furniture at this point, but here's furniture. So, you know, what I said about being able to use these new wall controls to get very thin pieces of wall, that's what we've been using it for. So every one of these blocks in the back, that's a block. Each one of these cushions, I suppose, is a block. For armrests are a block, just brought down to their minimum size or close to their minimum size, and then arranged until they looked like a couch. And over here we have the same old fence. This is a slightly different bench design from the one that I had in my city that I sort of teased at the start, but same principles. It's just a bunch of fences sitting on path and then arranged some shorter so that they can be the seat, some higher so that they can be the armrest, and, you know, placed in situ like that until they look kind of like a bench. And yeah, like I said, techniques that were dead on arrival because we have chairs and we have fences now. So what do I need this for? I don't know. Well, there's a couple of situations, right? Like I pointed out that if I was to place a building sort of back here so that it sits right on the edge of this block, and then I try to generate a prop in front of it using a window, it wouldn't actually place a prop anywhere here because this is too close to the edge of this block. So you might find yourself in a situation where you've set yourself up in such a way that you can't get a bench to generate in the place that you need it to. So, you know, at that point you might want to substitute it with one that you made by hand, maybe. Maybe you like the aesthetic more, it looks a little bit more rickety, you know, maybe you need a custom size, maybe you want more seats. Who knows, you know, I'm sure you'll find a reason, but yeah. A bit dead on arrival. Also just caught my eye again. Can hardly get it in focus. That's a bug that's fixed by now. But the minimum size for walls used to be even thinner, to the point that they would disappear, and I still have an old relic of that sitting on this map, which is quite cute. But anyway, talking about furniture, I do have one last piece of furniture to show you before we move on. So let's make our way over to the very inconspicuously placed house. Dun, 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 dun. Let us no-clip through this door. Let us not no-clip through this door because this is open and I'll show you how to do that. But that's a bed. That is a very, very shoddy bed that I've made. But honestly, I messed with the terrain in this place, so I think some of the blocks have gotten slightly misaligned. Ugh. The dangers of working with wall. But yeah, that's a bed, you know, that's fences on each side. The path that I used to make these fences the way they are is sized just right so that it doesn't turn the brick stacks into arches as well. Very finicky, but that's the suggestion of a bed. I got another one on a different map that we might see later. I've also put some fences on the interior of this building to sort of make the roof look a little more supported. You can see that here. I don't know if I should count that as a separate tip. It'll actually come up later as well, so never mind, we'll talk about that then. But yeah, this is an open door. How do you like that? That's not my own invention. But let me show you what that is about. Let me get this out of here, let me get that out of here. By the way, if you ever plan on furnishing the inside of a house, do it like this. Take like a base plate, lay out your interior on top of it, and only then bring in blocks over top to make a house. Right? Don't place your house down and then try to sneak your camera in there to work on a couch. It will turn you crazy. Do it like this so that you have freedom of movement to do whatever you need to do with furniture, and then bring in the house over top. General tip if you want to do interiors. Now, what's up with the open door? So let me break this, break that, break this, break not that, break this. All right, so this is obviously just a piece of freehand wall that I've bent right here for where the door is supposed to be. And then I rolled the dice. Actually, I could have rolled the dice a bit more. Whatever. But then I rolled the dice until I got a mostly clean door. Now, sometimes you can be lucky and get it right off the bat. However, other times you might not be so lucky. So in terms of how to get repeatable results, right? Grab a door, place it down as far as it will go into this corner. Don't worry too much about the height, because if you mess with this too much, you might just break it immediately. And then grab the wall and start pulling it. And the way that I originally had this set up, I pulled this wall out of here until I could use it for a garden, but I had to redo this map since then, so that has disappeared. But yeah, depending on the exact size and shape of this wall, it's going to re-roll the bricks on the end here, so you can just pull this out until eventually you either break the door. That's why I said don't bring this down too far. Alright. Oh, I'm also having the undulating door bug. Yeah, don't worry about that. Let me switch to the wall tool. Okay, you can just draw like this until eventually... That was really That was really good a second ago, and I drew past it. Until eventually, you have it looking the way that you want it to. But it will be a lot of re-rolling. This is a very finicky technique, but that hasn't stopped us before. See, that's fairly clean, but yeah, it changes again when you bring it down. I hope that better techniques for this will be invented. So far, my best wisdom is to just draw in like a really tight circle. You know, so that in the end you create a stack of bricks of indeterminate size that is small enough that you can hide it somewhere, right? And that way you may be able to create an open door. And you know, you can do this on an exterior wall as well. That's how I first saw it done. But I decided to use it for the interior here because it makes walking into the house just that a little bit more interesting. I've also like tried to put in a little bit of a door frame in here, but yeah, not too happy with that. But yeah, that's how that works, more or less. Hope it inspires you somehow. Anyway, what to do next? What to do next? Elephant in the room, elephant in the room. Well, if we're already on the house, let's talk about the bell. That's actually something that somebody did based on the prompt that I gave in one of my previous videos where I said, hey, this is a cool bell tower design. Wonder how to put a bell in it. I said something along those lines anyway. And they suggested, and I think very wisely so, to take, and I mean it is a massive bell. Let's acknowledge the elephant in the room. The bell is massive, but I do actually think it's cute. You know, take 2 blocks, one thin and long for sort of the bottom edge, and then for the tip that it's hanging from, and then another piece that is more bulbous, so that you can sort of get this bell shape. And if you then construct a bell tower around it, it actually doesn't look too bad. To my eye, anyway. Certainly, I tried to put this behind arches because we agreed that it looked cuter this way, but this does gimp me in the verticality department. I feel like if this was higher up and further away, it would look slightly better. But, you know, for now, I wanted to put it out there. Somebody did come up with a concept for a bell, and I don't hate it. I think it's quite cute. Anyway, let's acknowledge the elephant in the room. Another technique that's dead on arrival. A card. It's quite a large card, but I don't know if I can get a card to generate for us now in terms of clutter. But there is a card clutter item, 2 of them actually at this point. Yeah, okay, I could roll myself silly here and we would get nowhere. So let's not worry about that. But shortly before we got cards, somebody actually came up with how to do a card. And they originally only had wheels on 2 sides, if memory serves. Because honestly, it's better that way. Because this card is really quite wide. If we get our first person camera back in here, that is a massive, massive card. Certainly much bigger than the ones that we had, or that we have as clutter at this point. But yeah, it's just a minimum sized block, or rather minimum height block, I suppose. Brought completely down, adjusted to half timbering, and then, for me, because I like it to have 4 wheels, there's 4 trapdoors in here, and each of the trapdoors is responsible for generating one of these wheels. So I put 2 trapdoors in here, and I started clicking 1 until it gave me a wheel in the correct location. And then once I had that, I started clicking the other one until it gave me a wheel, and I did that on all 4 sides, and it took a while. But then I had the suggestion of a cart, and then you know, put 2 fences in front. It's like, oh, all right, this is where the ox goes, or this is where you tie your horses to, and that's done. And a slight elaboration to this design that has very recently been invented, thought of, I suppose, is to take another block, put it on the back here, and then it honestly really looks like there is a bit of a, you know, tarp on the back, like we, you know, you're all Americans, you've all played Oregon Trail at school, you know what those cards in Oregon Trail looked like, you know, they had this sort of like pointed arch sort of canvas covering on the back, and then, you know, dad would sit in front and here would be the horses, and, you know, son and wife would be in the back getting dysentery, you know, and it honestly looks great like that. So that's pretty brilliant. None of this is my own idea. None of this is my own idea, but none of most of it is my own idea. But yeah, that's card technology, and it's only been getting better. However, if you're planning on doing this back section with windows, be prepared to have to re-roll your wheels, because that will happen. So I'll leave it at this. Now, other elephant in the room. All right, I had a card here all the time. All the time, the whole time. This is a card. This is the card clutter that the game generates. So, how did I get all of this clutter in here? Quite easy, and I think I invented this actually. I think. But yeah, there's another block down here. So basically what I did is I grabbed, I put down this floor piece, and then I grabbed this floor piece. Here we go. Bring that down. And I put a bunch of trapdoors on here, and I clicked until they generated me the clutter that I wanted. And then I slid it down and the clutter regenerates, but it looks like it's on the clean floor. I believe I came up with this, but don't quote me on that. But a couple of people were making mentions in the Discord that they really liked the clutter, but they didn't like how they needed to place a trapdoor down. So I was like, why not put it on a block and, you know, slide it under there? That could work. I think that's how the story went. If I'm wrong about that, and you know, you can find time-stamped evidence that you came up with this before I did, and you posted it in the Discord before I did, do let me know. I think this was my idea. It's honestly getting really difficult to keep track of at this point. Anyway, something that was definitely somebody else's idea. I've got a bit of a catacomb over here, and as you can see, it goes down. It goes down the stairs into the dark depths. It doesn't go down very far, to be fair. You can see the sandy floor back there. You know, if I had this up a little bit further, I could carry that further down. But I really like the appearance of this, which is why I copied it. But as you might imagine, underneath here, it's just a bunch of walls, and they all have arches in them. And then as the walls progress towards the back, the arch progressively gets lowered step by step. So I built this from the front to the back. And that's how you do that. The slightly older brother, older cousin of this, is also a technique that is technically dead on arrival, I suppose I would call it, you know, tunnel, which I actually constructed differently, as you can see, which is honestly kind of trippy. So actually going back over here, you know, all of these are separate segments, but for this I tried a slightly different method, and I just grabbed the path brush and started drawing left to right and right to left. I did it in a sort of rectangular pattern in the front and then in a zigzag pattern in the back, and it honestly didn't change the results too much. But yeah, that's how you can do a tunnel. And I would call this one technically dead on arrival insofar as this is a player invented idea, but one of the starting builds that you get when you generate a new glade, you know how it like plops down a little build of something, you know, maybe to inspire you. One of them has like a tunnel like this leading up to a door, I'm fairly certain. So this is almost canon, right? Which is why I would call it kind of dead on arrival. but in a different way from the cart and the chairs. But nevertheless, you know, if you haven't seen that example build, here it is again. Tunnels. Let me actually... Oh man, it's gonna take some time. But let me actually walk my butt through there, or at least in there. I've also put a lantern in there, which of course doesn't turn on because it's daytime. But with that thing lit up, this might actually be quite cozy. Even more cozy than it already is. Well, that's pretty cool. So let's continue on with thievery. Let me show you something that I've stolen and then something that I derived from that myself. So here we have a pillory, or stockades, I do believe it is. So, you know, for the uninitiated, we are lacking 2 holds technically, but if you were a convicted anything back in the olden days, you might find your head stuck through here so that you can be publicly shamed. So of course we're missing 2 holds for your arms. So this is a stockade, and the construction of this is honestly pretty nutty. Which perhaps is why I didn't come up with it, because I'm not that creative. But let's take all the extraneous bits out of here and let's keep only... Come on, I want 5. Keep only these 2. So how do you do that? Because this is what you need for this technique to work, right? You need what is a fence arch, fence gate, you know, the things that we've been working with this entire time, but folded in half so that it creates this sort of appearance. And when I do it like this, it looks simple enough. It's like, oh yeah, I just put down a fence and then I fold it in half and it'll do that. You would think so, but not the case. It's a little bit more finicky than that. Ah, that's what I'm doing. Okay. So if you just grab a piece of fence, have it have 3 control points. Let's move this one in here a little bit. And when you try to fold it in half, it'll do, generally for me, it will do that, right? It'll put down another leg to stand on, and then I'll be very confused as to why it works for everybody else, but it doesn't work for me. So the secret sauce that you want is, let's imagine we've put this in the place that we want it. So this is the place where I want my stockades. So I've placed this piece down here. And now I've folded it in half. That worked too perfectly. Hold up. So we've put it in place. And I have folded it in half. And I'm getting the 3rd beam. And now the secret sauce is to start, much like the flying buttresses. Mr. Sheep, please. You start erasing the path from the back. And as you hit these 2 beams, for some reason it deletes the middle one. And that's how you can reliably and repeatedly get the fence arch folded in half. If it's right on the edge of where you've drawn your path, it becomes like that. So that's how you create that, and then you just assemble the pieces in this sort of manner in order to create a stockade. Now I'll talk about the rest of this in a minute, but the thing that I derived from that is this. This used to be slightly different. This used to be slightly prettier. Here we go. It's this sort of crane. You know, if you've ever seen pictures of like a medieval harbor, or even, you know, the early modern period harbor, so the warehouses will have cranes on the side of them. So, you know, the boat would land here at the bottom and then they would lift it up here and carry it through these doors. So this is the biggest that I have managed to tease out this folding an arch in half technique. That's the largest that I have managed to get it so far, and I use that, my own invention, as to sort of suggest the presence of a crane on the side of a building. However, much like the drawbridge, I'm missing a rope, I'm missing a chain, I'm missing something here to actually do the craning bit, but I feel like for a harbor build, this would suggest it well enough. I think you might be able to make that work. I used to have one of these in my city, but I actually got rid of it for a better view of the church. So anyway, the rest of this, this is obviously a gallows. So, you know, you string up your perpetrator and then you open the trapdoor and, you know, tomorrow's their funeral. Not my own invention. And also not my own invention, wooden stairs. Of course, now that we have fences, wooden stairs. Now there's been a couple of techniques for wooden stairs, and actually the first one that the Discord saw was using lanterns. So you would place lanterns more tightly than this, but you know, similar to how I've previously done balconies with wooden floors, you'd place lanterns and then you would use terrain, and by having the terrain go up, you would have the lanterns go up step by step, and that would sort of suggest the presence of wooden stairs. Now that we have full control over fences, you can do wooden stairs. You can't walk up these. If you wanted to walk up these, you would have to put a bit of stone wall in here to actually walk up that. So you'd be building, you know, 2 staircases. But yeah, I think they look fine. They mostly look fine. Though I don't like the way that I can look through them. It gives me the heebie-jeebies. But yeah, that's wooden stairs, that's gallows, that's stockades, and I just noticed that I got the got the tool chest with the sickle in it right in front of the gallows, so that's maybe a bit morbid. But anyway, as for this map, we have this, not my own design, but you know, if we're talking about buildings that you can walk into, we saw my design for stables earlier, where I just take a block and I make the entire front of it arches, and then, you know, that's my stable. Somebody has also suggested this, where you actually use freehand wall to draw your walls, and then you can use fences as well for a sort of door frame. And it creates this very nice little walk-in anything you want it to be. Walk-in workshop, walk-in stable, put a chicken coop in there. I've done designs for chicken coops before. They were terrible, but you know, maybe you can figure out something in there. And, you know, something nice for an open structure that still has a roof. And, you know, fingers crossed that one day we'll be able to lower the rooftops down even further, because that would make it look just that little bit better. Anyway, last thing. Now this is, as far as I can tell, my own design, but not my own idea. In the demo, 2 different people have presented designs for railroad tracks. One of them used, because again, the demo, they didn't have access to fences, used the lanterns for the wooden elements. So since I don't have to do that, I'm not doing that here. And the other one used also the lanterns, but used the lanterns for the rails and then the stones across. So I'm sort of doing neither one, but it's not really my own idea. So I got stone wall here, and then I have fences going across. And it sort of suggests the presence of rail tracks, which honestly I thought was genius. I don't exactly like how wide these stone bits are, but what I absolutely do not have the patience for is to, you know, grab pieces this wide and then, you know, go down the lane brick by brick. I can't bring myself to do it. But you know, railroad tracks, you might find that inspiring, and you might find a better way of doing it. The way that I did it with arches was and is for one very simple reason. It allows me to get a very clean top, like I explained with arcading in our recap. It allows me to get a very clean top for these rails, as long as the terrain stays the same. As soon as the terrain undulates, these will also undulate, but for this short segment, this worked best for me. And with that, I think we have everything covered on this map. So let me see what is up next. Okay, I'm back here again. Let's look at a couple more things. Let me actually take one note, something that I might add to my general control tips later. Here we go. And I suppose if my tips and tricks section earlier ended in, hey, I have 2 more things that I need to add onto the end there, you'll know that I actually added what I just wrote down in post. Anyway, let us talk locked doors. So one thing that I've done for a couple of these alleyways is that I've put short segments of wall on the ends of it so that it, you know, sort of gives it a more closed off courtyard sort of feel. However, you might not want the courtyard to be open, so you might want a way to lock your door. And as I'm certain you know, if you just have an arch, you can't put a door in that. You can't put a door in freehand walls in general. So something that I came up with way back in the day, actually doing the playtests before the demo, is, you know, again, it's a bunch of fence segments. You get the idea. It's a bunch of short segments of fence, but you can use that to brick off a door, make it look like it's locked. Now that was my original design. Slightly more sophisticated over here, where once again I've taken one larger segment, that's the one, and I've put it through here so that it gives it a bit more of a door look, like it has, like this door has a left side and a right side that are hinged on this beam and that beam. And then I've put one more in the middle to sort of suggest the separation of these 2 doors. And, oh god, is that a folded in half beam in the middle there? Let me just check if I can grab it. Only if I can grab it. It sure is. Okay. So going back to the point about folding beams in half, you know, if it doesn't quite work out, you get this sort of nubbin on one side, and I've actually purposefully used that. On the back side here, though, I'm not entirely sure what this is supposed to depict. I just put it on here because it added a little bit of something. But your guess is as good as mine as to what that is supposed to be. I did originally consider putting one on the left, one on the right, and then one in the middle, so it sort of looks like you're supposed to take a wooden beam horizontally and like slot that in from the top, you know, the way that you see people like lock castle doors in fantasy and medieval movies. But it didn't bother. So I don't know what this represents on this door at this point. Yeah. So that's something that I wanted to look at. Something else that I wanted to look at that I've forgotten about. Yes, windows, window related. Just a little design for, you remember bricked in windows, blind windows? Like I presented how if you take 2 blocks very tightly inside one another, you can like create a window that has bricks on the inside of it instead of glass. You know, a lot of people encounter that as a bug, but I was trying to sell it to you as a feature. Somebody on the Discord made a design which I actually really liked, where you sort of half brick the window. So in here I have a block minimum height that is sort of bricking out the bottom of these windows. If I brought it up slightly further, whoops, brought it back down, you know, I could make those windows smaller and smaller. But they sort of proposed it as a bungalow sort of type window, and I actually really liked the way that looked, so I put it on the back side of this gatehouse here. Primarily because there's honestly not enough room for 3rd floor up here, but it looked too empty otherwise. So that's the way that I did that. Anyway, something else, something very small that I'm not entirely convinced by is, but sorry. something that I'm not entirely convinced by, but this is it. You know, I've sort of used a minimum sized round piece with half timbering as a type of flower pot. You know, when you're in the city and you sometimes see trees that are supported or protected by little wooden supports around them. You know, that's sort of a suggestion of that. And I have to sort of have it this tall because if I brought it down into contact with the floor, the railing would disappear. So this is the shortest that I can make it. But that's a sort of tree flower pot design that you might like, maybe. Next to it, talking about Dead on Arrival, or rather, this I literally stole from Anna. This one I literally stole from the devs. This is a little, you know, like larger bay window. It's just a, you know, square piece, but it has a corner window with 2 windows on one side, corner window with 2 windows on the other side, and then one in the middle. Literally stole this from Anna, but I'm not sure how many people would have seen that. I think it may appear either on one of their Twitter posts or in one of their dev diaries. I'm not entirely sure. But yeah, I stole this from them, and it's quite cute and I like it. Beyond that, other things to look at in the city. There's so many, I keep forgetting what they are. Let me stay in this corner because I saw it out of the corner of my eye. I have a bit of wooden cladding on the bottom of this wall, sort of underneath this window to frame this window a little better. And I'm doing the same with the door here, where I can't grab them, but where I have 2 wooden beams to frame the door. So once again, these are all just fence segments. You know, take a segment of fence, put it in here. It has path underneath to make it like tall, big, straight. And that's how I've assembled this cladding. Also not my own idea, but looks quite cute. What I originally did with fences is I've put them on the corners to sort of make the corners look a little more solid, but I spent a few weeks asking people for better ideas for what to do with fences and half timbering. This was the best that I could come up with. This is the way better thing that somebody else came up with. You know, framing your windows and framing your doors using fences on half timbered buildings. Awesome. Looks very good. From there, what else do we have? I suppose I could briefly talk about this catwalk design. Let me actually go into first person mode and leg it over there. What's the nearest wall? I think that's the nearest wall. Right, I just remembered something else. We'll get there in a minute. So I built a wall and it has a catwalk, and you can in fact walk along the length of this wall, at least until it hits the towers on the corner. And this is just smart, I guess, finicky assembly of different blocks. There's no special interaction at play here. But if we go out here, what's a very visible segment? I suppose one of these ones, because they have the garden in front. So if I remove the trees here so that we can see a little bit better. So this top block is just the roof, that's just a Merlon. Now this is the meat and potatoes. So this block that has the arches on the inside is also the wall on the outside. So I have this block in here sort of as the body of the wall, and then I have path drawn just here on the outside edge to give it arches, and then also drawn in between here so that I can get the arches on the side, allowing me to walk through. Very finicky, very fine-tune heavy, but that's the reason why sometimes when you sneak a look in here you can see a gap, because if I extended these bottom blocks any further to the right, they would gain an arch as well. So very thin path drawing in between here so that we can get an arch on the short side so that you can actually walk across the catwalk. And then I just have a half timbered block here to give me the railing. And then underneath that I have one solid block for, you know, covering up the inside. And then I have one more block on the outside that I'm using for batters. If you've never heard the term batters before, it's when at the bottom of a wall you have like a segment going up diagonally so that you can't stand at the bottom of the wall proper, because you can't clamber up that incline in order to, I don't know, plant an explosive charge at the bottom of the wall, you know, things like that. So that you have to bring a larger siege ladder. You can't place the ladder at the foot of the wall. You have to place it away from the wall because there's this diagonal incline in front of it. You know, that's what batters are, and I'm using low pieces with stairs in order to sort of visually suggest batters. That's something that also came up in one of my previous videos. But yeah, that's how I did these walls with a catwalk. It's my own design, and I think it took 15 minutes, 10-15 minutes per segment. And I mean, you can count the segments and just about guesstimate how long I spent on the wall for this place. You know, the things you do. Trying to have fun in the video game, I suppose. Oh, man. Yeah. I don't know if it needs mentioning, but, you know, I did show you these bridges before, which are just two walls with arches on the sides and then a piece with railings in the middle. Quite a simple design, but quite effective for having a very low bridge like this for sort of surface street level walking. And let me go through my list. There's other things in the city and I keep forgetting about them. Oh yes, the basement windows. Oh, enforcing the small chimneys. Yes. Okay, let us go over here. So, as you might be able to guess, this is sort of supposed to be the like richer area of the city. And one thing that I did is that I had these half basements. So the first floor actually starts a little bit up from street level. And then we have these basements that are sort of peeking forward. And one thing that I did for basement windows, I'm actually not sure if I could have snuck a regular sized window in there. Oh no, I couldn't have, because these blocks, right. I'm using arcading on these walls. Of course I can't sneak a proper window in there because these aren't actually on the ground, otherwise the arcades wouldn't work. Right, so I can't sneak a full window in here for suggesting a basement window, but I do feel like the arrow slits sort of do fine for being a basement window. Right. That's another thing that I needed to add to my tips section. Oh no. Oh, let me. Very high quality, these videos. Very planned, very thought out. But yeah, I use the arrow holes to sort of put basement windows at the bottom level of these buildings. Might find that interesting. Something else that you can do with arrow slits, arrow holes primarily. What some of you might know but might struggle with creating, and I think somebody else actually also thought of this, but we sort of came to it independently. So if you place a chimney, it's a chimney, but if you place a chimney somewhere where it doesn't have space to be a chimney, like under a window, it becomes this small copper sort of chimney. Now, the way that you can force it, quote unquote, is, if I go in here to one of my cheaper looking buildings, is by using an arrow hole, because it's so small, it hides away quite well right underneath the edge of the rooftop, right? Like it's pretty much hidden from at any angle higher than eye level. So it's hidden quite well, and the presence of the arrow hole will then force the chimney to become the small chimney. So I use that at a couple different places, but it was most easily demonstrated over there because I used a lot more of the small chimneys back there. But I do believe right back here I have another house where I've used the arrow hole, actually in a dual role here. Both for forcing the arrow slit and also because I kind of like the way that it looks. I have it on a different building. I mean, let me peek around. Somewhere over here. Yeah. I kind of like putting the arrow hole into the sort of gable section of a half-timbered house. Like a place for bats and birds to pass between the attic and the great outdoors. That's something else that I use these arrow holes for. They're pretty good, they're pretty versatile, surprisingly. I never would have thought that I would find many uses for hole, but, you know, sometimes inspiration strikes. What else? Okay, what else? A different map is what else. Just one little thing in here. I've previously, actually I may not have mentioned it, but generally I like having, you know, like an aspect to my buildings where the closer to the ground it is, the sort of the more gritty, rustic it gets. One thing that I do for that, and you'll see that on my castles actually, my castles usually are bare stone at the bottom, but then washed walls at the top. Something that I did here for these half-timbered houses is that I put them on stone foundations. So let's take this one because it's rather small, so it's easier to work with. So down here I just have 2 stone blocks stacked inside one another to create, you know, a clean top edge, and then I've put the half-timbered building on top of that. And I just really appreciate the way that that looks. You know, because especially in the Olden Glade, which looks rather moist. Something about the word moist. Which looks rather wet and rainy. You know, you might appreciate this look for giving a bit more realism to your build, where it's like, well, you know, if this is half timbering, you know, if there's, you know, organic matter, dirt, mud, potentially between these walls behind the washing, you know, I might not want to have that at ground level because it's just going to get soggy and rot and collapse. You might want to put a stone foundation underneath it, and I honestly really like the way that it looks. But then I like the way that this place looks in general. It's one of my personal more favorite builds, even though it's kind of plain, has an inside courtyard that I quite like with a little balcony. You know, I like this place. I'm very fond of this place. And you know, it even comes with a little private chapel for some reason. Rich people, I guess. Anyway, I pretty much don't have anything else to show on this map, but something that I do kind of want to raise awareness for. And, you know, perhaps you don't need me to tell you, but this is sort of a similar point in... It's a point in the same vein as in my previous videos where I stated, hey, you can play with building shape and you can play with rooftop shape, you know, feel free to layer things a little bit. Now, all of it is usually obscured by trees on this map because I wanted to place this house in a forest. But, you know, do layer your terrain, do play with terrain, do give it, you know, some variation. I honestly have so many different terrain strokes in here to create a little cliff here, then a little patch of dirt there, a little cliff here, a little bit of grass there. Make it look a little more splodgy, a little bit more random. You know, the side is a little bit smoother, so I had to fine-tune this place a lot in order to get the path down here quite nicely. But, you know, this is your free PSA. Do remember, you can layer your terrain. You probably don't need me to tell you that, but since we were already here and I wanted to spend a little more time on this map, thought I would point it out. So, moving on to somewhere else. On this map, I don't actually have anything to show you. Technically, this bridge design, nowadays I feel like it would be slightly better if I had these slightly lower. But, you know, you might feel inclined to steal this bridge design. So that's just, you know, 3 blocks of half timbering at the top for a sort of roof. And then I have... Oh boy. So I have one piece for the walkway, then I have another piece to add a bit more meat and a bit more, you know, stuff to the side profile, and then I have 3 blocks down here in order to generate these supports right on either side of the river. And I think this design looks quite cute and looks quite sturdy, and I like the way that this map looks in general, but it's not finished. If you look on the back side of it, I sort of stopped halfway. Yeah, but this is also a map where I played a lot with banners. Just wanted to show you guys, and you know, feel free to steal the bridge, but this is another elaboration on what I mean with, or what I'm talking about when I talk about how you should use the columns to add more support to your bridges, because I think it makes a mountain of difference visually. Also, I've used the flower brush to add a little bit more green detail to these slopes, because the slopes can look quite plain because the dirt patches might be too small to generate you proper grass. However, if you use the flower brush, you may be able to get a few bushes in there where the game won't give you bushes naturally. So, you know, stay aware of that. Here you can also see what I said about my castles are usually rustic on the bottom and then washed on the top. It's another map that shows that quite well. Also shows quite well how I put these merlons on everything. Anyway, moving on. Here, this one has an actual something. So this is something somebody else did, you know, much in the same vein as the cart or car tracks that you can put into the ground if you take the path brush, especially now that it's this adjustable, and you know, you put down 2 parallel lines and it sort of looks like a car drove down here. If you do that on an empty field like this, or rather, if you do it on an empty meadow, it makes it look like an empty field, like the farmer just went through here, harvested all the crop and then left. I'm sure if you played with the flower brush a little bit, especially in some of the other glades, it could look like there's actually something growing in here. But for now, this is the way that I decided to do it here. You know, you can do a suggestion of a field. Not my own design, but something that's actually quite cute, and I'm surprised every time how well it works. Something that I think I did first, don't quote me on that, porch. You know, of course you can do a porch. You can take a half-timbered block so that you have a railing, and then take some fences underneath a roof, and it gives you a nice little porch that you can wrap your houses in. And now that we have chairs and benches, it actually looks quite nice. Anyway, I think that's everything here. This is an old house that I used to build in Minecraft all the time, and I decided to do it in Tiny Glade. Actually looks very similar. Yeah, moving on again. Here we are, and this is actually a map where I have more than one thing to show you, finally, again. So, I've talked about ruins before. In fact, frequent viewers of my channel may recognize this layout of church, because I've done a church ruin pretty much just like this before, when I was advocating for putting floors in your ruins. Because a lot of people, from what I can see on the Discord anyway, you know, will tend to build ruins by building their houses the way that you would expect to, you know, by building their houses and then ruining them, and you know, that's, you know, a passable ruin. But I was making the point that you can gain a lot by leaving the floor in your ruin, or rather putting a floor in your ruin, the way that the building process is in this game. And I've expanded this idea, as you can see, with one element on this map. Oh man, this spawned me far away. And that is a little bit of brick clutter, which I've actually put down on this ruined bridge as well. So what these are, as you might expect, is very short segments of wall. It keeps coming back to short segments of wall and short segments of fence, but if you scatter around enough of them, if you scatter around enough of them, to me it looks like quite convincing scattered bricks from the walls. And now we did used to do this on the outside, like way back in the day, way back in the playtest days. So, you know, you grab a piece of brick, make it as small as it goes, and then bring it down. And you know, that still works. However, upon closer inspection, you might see that these are actually, you know, stacks of bricks too tall. Which, you know, honestly, in the grass, it doesn't make a difference. However, combined with the floor, it becomes perfect because you can hide the bottom brick and you can only have the top brick, and you can have different heights of brick, you know, without having multiple bricks stacked on top of one another visually. So you get this random smattering of bricks in your church ruin. So that's what I did, and I think it looks quite nice. I've also left one of the arches in here. You know, if you were trying to think of what this church would have looked like when it still stood, you know, we would have arches here between the windows and then buttresses on the outside to hold the wall up, right? So I've put 3 lines of sort of ruined wall in here and 2 in here to suggest sort of the crumpled down arches, but then I left 1 standing just to create a bit more visual interest when you look down the church like this. But yeah, that's everything on the church. I also did it for the bridge. This is a bridge. And I also did it on a couple of these buildings. Though with the buildings it makes slightly less sense than with the church, but you know, what do I know. But yeah, I said I would talk about the fences on the inside of buildings more. And this is the point where I talk about that, because this is where I did it. I sort of added what would have been, quote unquote, the rooftop beams to these buildings in order to give them a bit more intricacy again as a ruin, a bit more visual interest. And honestly, it also makes it killer to walk through on the inside. For a while I actually had a roof on top of this and it was quite cozy in here. But yeah, just another little something to add a little something to your ruins, make them look a little bit more visually detailed, intricate, interesting. Oh yeah, this is the other place where I built a bed, a bit of a larger bed. Bit of a worse bed, I might even be inclined to say, even though the other one was also far from even. Alright, something else that I want to talk about with the bridge. Because as you might see, as you might be able to see, I've put a pier in the middle of this bridge. And now it's a shame that I used this technique on a map where everything would be put to ruin, but I think this could look quite cute on a map where everything was still intact. So, you know, the pier, or a pier in terms of bridge building, is the support that you have in the water. So I actually don't know if the left and the right edge would also be called piers. Anyway, but I put a pier in the middle of my bridge. I have 1 piece here in the middle, 1 square piece, and then I have 1 piece on either side, but rotated 45 degrees, so that they, you know, break the water like this. This also had a name, but I forgot what it was. This thing that juts out into the water from the pier in order to protect the pier has a name. I forgot the name. Anyway, I used a block for this, and then 2 blocks actually, and then I built up the rest using short wall segments in order to create the upper layers. And that way I have a full pier, and on this side I colored in some of them in a darker shade and some of them in a lighter shade to create another bit of visual interest, but I'm not sure how much I like that actually. But yeah, piers, put them under your bridges. Give them, again, a little bit more support. You know, I use my arches for support here, and I use a pier for support in the middle, and I think it looks great. However, this entire build was for a ruin, so I had to break my bridge, and this is what's left. Now for something that I didn't invent on this map. Actually, one more thing about ruins. So we've previously talked about chimney tech, right? Using short segments of brick for producing chimneys. And of course, one might be inclined to say, well, now that we have these chimneys, what do I need the chimneys that I do by hand for anymore? What do I need the chimneys that we do by hand for anymore? Why would I need them? Well, you might need them for a ruin build, because as of right now, I can't toggle the smoke off in the other two, which looks a little weird for a ruin. I've come up with my own sort of headcanon for why the ovens are on in this obviously dilapidated town. However, you can sidestep this issue by building a chimney out of bricks, and might fit the mood better. Also, you know, shape. You can get different shapes. I have a couple of different shapes that people have sort of come up with. I'm not sure if I'll feature them in this video, but you know, I'm sure you're creative enough to come up with a few different shapes for chimneys. Anyway, now the other thing that we've started doing, and this is not my own doing, not entirely anyway. Honestly, unsure which parts are mine and which parts aren't. But you can add a short bit of arch. So once again, this is just a short segment of wall. There's path underneath there to make it an arch. And the path is a little shorter than the wall, so that the arch is clean. We talked about that with buttressing in the recap section. And then you stick a lantern in the middle, and if you turn it to night, you know, the oven will actually light up. Now for this one, with how prominent the lantern is, it doesn't look too convincing, but if I was to close this one off at the front with how deep the lantern is in there, I feel like that'll be a little bit better. And alright, on this one I didn't even bother. But yeah, that's something that you can do, you know, actually put some proper ovens in there. And you know, I added these 2 blocks at the front, sort of so that it doesn't look like your oven if you actually wanted to fill it with wood, or your fireplace if you wanted to fill it with wood. It's just sort of spilling out into your living room. I put these 2 blocks in the front to close it off a little bit. But yeah, that's a design, not of my own creation, for having your ovens light up. And I think that's everything special on this map. Though I will point out, speaking of trees that the tree tool won't give you, call back to my tips section at the start, this chonker, this absolute unit, if you want to use this one, you know, you better put him somewhere safe while you're building, and then you know, fetch him back later, because this tree tool is not going to give you him, and I like him a lot. I think it's quite waste. Right. Now, before I leave, I just remembered one more thing in here. More intricate gravestones. More intricate gravestones. We talked about gravestones before, and people have in fact come up with better designs, you know, especially now that we can use shorter segments of bricks. You can in fact go wild with brickstone designs. These honestly aren't the best, but they are mine. But the entire idea of using shorter bricks to sort of give the gravestone a more rounded appearance, entirely not my own idea. Okay, but now I think we have everything on this map. So let me see what is even left at this point. Okay, I said what is even left at this point, and I have at least 8 more things on my list, most of which I actually haven't built yet. So let me show you the last thing that I have ready, and then I'll go build that and then I'll get you back. So this is something that I found very recently, and this is something that I think I'm directly responsible for. Because, and I want to give you the background on this first because it absolutely tickles me pink. So you might remember that arches used to have a fairly restrictive max height, but nowadays they can go quite tall and they can also go quite short. And that change was made more or less in response to an inquiry that I made, where I was like, hey, look at this use case. I put a road down and I put a building down and I can barely get enough arch to do arcades for 2 floors. And, you know, especially not if I'm trying to use Gothic windows, which are a little taller than the cabin windows. So the minimum and the maximum height were, you know, one increased for one decreased. And something that you might not know, in water, as far as I understand the game anyway, the way that the game handles water is that it subtracts the depth of the water from the height of the arch. You know, you saw it like dip down slightly. As a result, upside down arches, let me put one down here so that you can see it clearly. But if you take an arch and you have it in water, if you have it up here all is normal, if you keep bringing it down, eventually it goes straight, and if you keep bringing it down, it goes upside down. And I don't know how long this technique will be here for. I've lobbied for it to not be fixed. But currently, this is what arches do if you bring them into water. I'm going to guess because the minimum height of an arch is now so low that you actually bring it down to minimum height. Subtracting the depth of the water from it makes it, you know, negative, and it makes the arch turn upside down. That's my theory. Might be complete bollocks, but upside down arches. And here's 2 things that I did with them. I made a bowl, whatever you might need a bowl for. And then I have 2 designs here. Now this only works at the surface level of the water, because of course if you try to raise the arch higher, it would no longer be upside down. But I made this design where I have normal arches on top, normal arches on top, and then upside down arches on the bottom to sort of make a fairly modernist design for the side of a bridge. And then I also made these stone railings, these balustrades, where I have one section, that's the right one, yeah, where I have one section that I brought down until it was just about straight, and I have another one underneath that I have upside down, and then I have these ones in the middle to sort of, I don't know, give the connecting bits a little bit more mass. And I think that's quite a nice railing, quite a nice balustrade, I suppose, maybe in English, who knows. But yeah, upside down arches, very recent discovery, because I'm fairly certain this bug has only been here since very recently. Go nuts with it, use it in a lot of things, post those things back on the Discord, get everybody together, right? Get everybody really excited about, oh, I didn't know you could turn arches upside down, I'm gonna use that in my build now. And if we get enough people together who are too passionate about this, then they can't fix it anymore. That's what I'm hoping. Anyway, yeah, that's the last one on my list that I've pre-built. I now gotta go back, make a new glade and build 8 more things. Something like 8 more things if I want to present them all to you. And then I'll get you back for the last leg of this, once again, far too long video. See you, for you in a second, for me, see you in a bit. Okay, final stretch. Let's go for it. So, first things first, let's talk about something that I did. Bigger rocks in water. Now, you may know that if you take the path brush and you use it on a place where you have water, you get little rocks in them, and the more you path, the more you rock. That was an oddly loud sound effect. strange. However, those rocks might not be large enough for you, so here's some bigger rocks, and the way that I make these might be obvious to you, but you know, if you take some water, when you grab the eraser and you just erase a little spot in there. Now this one's already eating terrain from somewhere else, but you can then use your terrain brush on this, and because the water forces all of the terrain down around this one spot where we deleted the water, what you end up with is a spot where you have a nice large boulder. And depending on how much you erase, it gets bigger. That's how you get bigger rocks in your water. Really quite simple, a landscaping idea. Nothing special there by any means. Something a little more interesting, this originally went along with the kind of catacombs entrance that I showed you guys earlier, where it looks like you're actually... looks like the doorway actually like descends down underground, right? So the person that originally did that also did this. Well, they had a different sign, but you can use the freehand wall inside a floor like this in order to draw something on it. I decided to do a moon, but you know, you can pretty much draw any shape that you like. Now I took the easy way out. I decided to leave this in 2 pieces, and then I put some path underneath it to get the clean top edge that we've talked about so many times already. That way I don't have to adjust these all individually. But of course, you know, and especially if you wanted this, excuse me, Mr. Sheep, especially if you wanted this lower, because this is as low as I can get it now. But if you wanted it even lower, you would have to cut it into small segments, and then you could get it, you know, quite a bit lower still. But for demonstration purposes, I just wanted to do it quick and dirty. So that's what I did, and I gave us a little moon. Now the other thing that we have in here is a suggestion of a round window. Now I'm fairly certain that these looked way better when I didn't do them, but you know, you get the idea. So I have a wall in here with an arch in it, and then I have little pieces of wall here to sort of do the bottom half of the circle. And if you then smack a window behind that, it kind of gives you the suggestion of a round window. Now this would look slightly better if the arch was slightly bigger and you actually stacked more than one window. I'm fairly certain, because this way it's still pretty obvious to somebody who's played the game that that is obviously the regular double window. But you know, you can do it better than me. The other thing here is this sort of outdoor barbecue fireplace. So this is just a piece of wall. There's another piece of wall behind it, and then a chimney in the middle. Sort of giving you the suggestion that, you know, this is where you stuff the wood in, and then this is where you cook, potentially. Either that, or I suppose your bread could go in the bottom as well. You know, people who work with ovens more than I do can be the judge of that. Alright. Let's go over here to this bridge. Now, this bridge is a design that I don't want to say that I commissioned, but I was complaining about my difficulties with building bridges, and somebody suggested this design. So what this is you have 2 blocks on the sides here to sort of give this stairs, and then you have 1 block in the middle. Now, this is just a regular building block, but with, you know, with the corners pulled all the way out here so that you get these stair step corners, and then have the entire roof rotated this way so that the shingles, the tiles are in the direction of travel across the bridge. And if you then slot it in here and you draw some path underneath, you get a nice thick gap underneath the bridge that you can look through, but you also get something that looks like a road surface over top. And in fact, the only way that I suppose you can get a bridge that actually curves up and back down. You know, I suppose you could do a stair-step pattern with building blocks as well, but my main complaint was that if I raise a bridge up high enough to get that sort of gap, I also need to put quite the hefty staircase on either side. So my complaints about that gifted me by somebody else's hand. This bridge design. Now something that we have behind it is something that's not quite done cooking, but something that actually occurred to me while I was building this, because I saw the seam between this walls' whitewashing and this blocks' whitewashing. I was like, that's sort of interesting. So I did that again here. So I have a building block on the inside and then a bit of wall on the outside. And I gave the wall on the outside a darker shade and the inside one a lighter shade. So it kind of looks like it all used to be one color, but it sort of started cracking away at the top, right? Something like that maybe adds a little bit more variety to the washing. That's not quite done cooking. I had this idea quite spontaneously, so some experimentation is still required, but you know, you might feel motivated to take the ball with that one and run with it. I encourage it, but you know, I've had something very new idea. Something else that's pretty new, we'll skip over that actually. And actually, considering that I'm skipping over that, perhaps not as new, but something that a lot of people, I'm not actually sure who did it first, have been doing around the Discord is sort of put down dry fountains, you know. A lot of people have wanted fountains for decoration in their towns, understandably enough. So in the absence of having proper fountains, a lot of people have been doing dry fountains. So, you know, it's just the shape of a fountain attached to a building or put in a square somewhere where you would expect a fountain, and then some sort of spout in the middle where the water would come out, and, you know, sort of visually it suggests that this is where a fountain would go if we weren't in a drought, apparently. Now, something that I've added to that, and this also isn't entirely my own idea, though I think I'm the first one to apply this to a fountain, don't quote me on that. So I have a very short brick stack here that I've put an arrow slit into. That's something that somebody used for a different build. Like yesterday, the day before yesterday, very recently. And I've taken this and then I've put another corresponding hole in the wall behind. And that way, when you look at it sort of at eye level, it really looks like there's a pipe going down in there. And I really enjoy the way that it looks. So that's my fountain design. But none of the ideas are mine. But this is my design. Anyway, something else that isn't mine, but something that somebody on the Discord did with the new thin wall pieces is sort of prison bars for a prison cell. So I took the liberty of putting a door in it. I don't think that they had a door in it. But yeah, they used the short walls for prison bars. Now that we have the fences, obviously I would use the fences, because that way we can also get, you know, horizontal pieces in there. But that's what they designed, so that's what I'm stealing. And you can substitute the wall with fences in your own time. And if you paint the fences black, it'll probably even look like metal again. However, speaking of fences, yeah, let me do that first before I show you the last thing on this map. Speaking of fences, this here, a portcullis of my own making. Now, I would zoom out and show you more, but this isn't entirely just my build. This is a cooperative build, so I don't consider myself at liberty to show all of it off. Certainly not on my channel. But this is one thing that I did for it. It's a portcullis, just made using sections of fence, exactly what you would expect it to be. So, you know, I just layered these in a way that I had enough vertical members to really close off the gap, and then enough horizontal members to close off the gap. As a result, I have a lot of strange, weird, random diagonal pieces in here, but I'm honestly not too worried about it because it does kind of look neat. But yeah, now that we have fences, you know, speaking of drawbridges and prison cells, defensive structures, you know, portcullis is now on the menu. And, you know, this is the way that mine did. You can make a prettier one, I'm fairly certain. Alright, and with that said, one last thing on the old map, and then we should finally be at an end with this video. And I honestly should have added an I think to that. I think we're at the end of the video, because there's always more. There's always one last thing. Anyway, eagle-eyed viewers may have been curious about this random shadow over here. So if I zoom out a bit and if I go up a bit, you can see that we have a floating object in here. Now, floating objects aren't exactly new to TinyGlade. We've had bugs like this before and they've been fixed. So I didn't pay much attention to this for the longest time because I honestly expected it to be fixed before release. You know, but the way that it used to work back in the day was that, you know, you'd get a piece that would have legs and you'd put terrain under it, and then I think it was that you removed the terrain but the feet wouldn't update, something like that, whatever. But nowadays, much simpler. Grab a round piece, lift it up, grab another round piece, stick them inside one another, and the legs just disappear. I don't know why, but it works. It works, it's simple, it's easy, you can build on it. So if I grab another piece and bring it over here, works perfectly fine. Yeah, not sure how or why that happened, but it did. So I don't expect this to get... I'll level with you. Today is the 21st of September. I don't expect this to get fixed by the 23rd, right? The same way that I don't expect the upside down arches to get fixed. So as of right now, as you're watching this on release, hopefully, for your sanity, this should still work. So if you want to do a sky castle, do it now, because I also don't know if this isn't going to get fixed. Like I said, I didn't pay attention to this technique initially because I honestly expected it to be gone within a few days, but it hasn't. So, you know, while it's here, do what you want with it, you know, considering especially that you have all the space to really build a floating castle. So go wild with it. That's my last, I think, suggestion to you, because that is all of the things on my list. Let me scroll up here again. But on my list there's nothing else left. I suppose I'll bring us back to my city map so that we can walk around a bit, and I'll give a bit of an outro. And then we can finally call it a day. Yep. Nothing else in here. Okay. However much I even have to say for an outro, really. But yeah, that's this video. I did take a couple of peeks at how much footage I've taken. So, you know, I still have to cut this all together, but yeah, it's a big one. It might even end up, it will probably end up being even bigger than the first one. But thank you ever so much for tuning in again, however much of the video you've actually seen yourself. That's something that I missed in my last revision. Thank you for tuning in. I definitely hope that some of the things that I have shown here have inspired you, gotten you to think outside the box a little bit with building in this game. I do think that there is a lot of potential in TinyGlade that might go unnoticed if you're not looking for it, I suppose. You know, with the demo definitely, but you know, even with a full version. One might still think now that I have all of these options at my fingertips. That's also something that I missed in my last revision. With all of these options at my fingertips, what else really is there to explore? And there is so much to explore in this game. So I encourage you to explore and to try and work the problem if you encounter one. You know, to not let I can't do that because that's not a feature. To not let that be the final answer, because you might be surprised what is possible. As for me, I don't know if there will be another video. You know, I intended these videos from the start. I don't know if I said as much in the first one, but I intended these videos from the start to sort of be repositories of building tips and tricks that we've accumulated in the playtests and the demos for the specific purpose of kind of kickstarting building tech, so to speak, within the Tinyglade community, if there is such a thing. You know, to put it all out there for people to find, for people to take notice of, so that, you know, these things don't necessarily need to be rediscovered by everybody before they can enter people's toolboxes, right? So that everybody has access to these techniques, possibly, hopefully, eventually. And so that it will be clearer from the start that Tinyglade is a building game with a lot more potential than is in its native tools. So, with that being said and done, with me having put out these repositories of all of the tricks that we've come up with collectively, or most of them anyway, there's not much for me left to do, so I don't know if I'll do another video. I honestly don't know how much I'll be playing this game in the near future. I mean, I'll probably play it quite a bit, but you know, at this point I do have like 300 something hours in it just from the playtests. So, you know, I don't know how much more there is for me to discover, because I consider myself to be pretty creatively bankrupt at this point. You know, I don't want to paint the devil on the wall, but, you know, still, that's sort of where I'm at this point. I don't know. And I definitely can't guarantee. But I'm gonna come up with a whole lot of stuff. And at this point, with the full game being out and with everybody having access to it, you know, I think that everybody's techniques in the future will also be their own to share with the internet. Won't necessarily be my duty. Not even duty, might even be presumptuous for me to keep grabbing up everybody else's techniques and put them out there for the world to see under my name, even if I do try to credit them. But yeah, all of that is a very long-winded way of saying thanks for tuning in. I don't know if there will be a next time. Who knows, maybe I'll keep uploading the devlog videos or dev diary videos where I, you know, point at stuff at and you know, act more excited than I am, I suppose. You know, act it up a little bit, but you know, might see more of those. But I don't know if I'll commit. I think that's a good word. I don't know if I will commit to being a Tinyglade building YouTuber. So if that's what you're here for, sorry to burst your bubble. I do think that my videos are probably best saved in a playlist rather than subscribing to my channel, but you know, I'm not your dad. You can subscribe to whoever you want, and you know, I won't take up any space on your feed if I don't upload. So, you know, stay subscribed if you want, whatever. But yeah, I am happy that I reached as many people as I did in my previous videos. I hope that this video will perform similarly, specifically similarly to the first video that I uploaded, because I did see the viewer numbers drop with subsequent videos, obviously, which is also part of why I did the recap. So I hope that this one will do about as well as the first one that I uploaded. That will have been a hard cut because I messed up in my voiceover. My greatest regards and a huge shout out to everybody whose ideas I've stolen. And, you know, especially a huge shout out to the devs, to Tom and Anna. For one, for inviting me to the playtest. For one, I suppose. The other thing is for letting me continue playing in subsequent playtests, just like the rest of the playtesters, but, you know, when I was invited to one, I didn't exactly expect to be here for every single subsequent one, but that was a huge boon. So shout out to them for giving me this opportunity, shout out to them for continuously plugging my YouTube channel. I obviously don't know yet if they'll do it with this video, but they have previously plastered my videos on their company Twitter, which obviously helped me get the reach that I did. I wouldn't have gotten the reach that I did on my own. So thank you, hugely thank you for helping me spread the building ideas, techniques, everything that I've come up with, that everybody else has come up with. You know, you guys have contributed greatly to letting people know just what this game is capable of, even if you keep pretending like it's just us players who come up with the stuff. But, you know, if we come up with our ideas in some shady corner but nobody knows, you know, it's not of the greatest significance, you know, but the fact that you continuously plug your own players, you know, you post our builds on your Twitter, you post my videos on your Twitter, you know, you really make sure that everybody can see. That is also doing a huge service to the community. So shout out to you as well for supporting your players like this. And I suppose this is where I'll leave it. This is already longer than the intro section was, so let's cut it. Thank you for tuning in. I don't know if there is a next time. If there is a next time, see you next time. If there isn't a next time, buy the game, buy your friends the game, make another Steam account and buy the game. Subscribe to my SoundCloud. There's a link to Audible in the description. Play Raid Shadow Legends. Here's... Oh God, what was the food one? The one where they like send you a package like once a month with like pre-portioned out dinners in them. That one, get that one. Curiosity Stream Nebula Bundle. Subscribe to my Patreon, subscribe to my Twitter, ring the bell. Yeah, so, you know, something like that. You know, whatever the fuck YouTubers usually say at this point. Have a good one.